and had, oh, okay. Linda was a painter, a teacher, a gallery owner, and I started going to her studio once a week at age 3.5 to learn how to paint. She had me doing oil paintings at that age, which is pretty incredible. These are actually some of Linda's pieces, and I wanted to share them with you so you could see what was kind of an important influence on me in the beginning. Her work dealt with a lot of the trauma that she had been through in her life, growing up in poverty, in an abusive home. So from the beginning, I saw that art was a lot more than just a pretty picture on a wall, but it's actually a way to communicate something and a way to tell your story and kind of process your life. Now, of course, at that age, I wasn't going quite that deep. Here's my very first oil painting at age 4. If you can't tell, it is Mary Poppins, one of my favorite movies at the time. What was so great about going to Linda's class was that she allowed me to learn the techniques of painting, but with whatever subject matter I was interested in. So my parents' house just filled up with these giant oil paintings of Disney characters and superheroes and that kind of stuff. And to this day, I do a lot of teaching myself now. I really do believe that's the best way to teach anyone really of any age about painting, because you don't have to just sit and paint a bowl of fruit. You can actually, create art that tells your story. So art was something I took a lot of pride in. It became a part of my identity. People at school would think of me as, the artist. So I was very proud of that. But growing up in the Midwest in the early 80s, there were other aspects of my identity that I quickly learned I should not be so proud of. And, at that time, with the lack of information in media or anything, I didn't even know what the word gay meant or queer or LGBT. I just knew that there was something about me that was different. And at school, my peers really started to treat me like that. And so I was still going to Linda's class every Monday night. I would go to her studio for painting lessons. And so she could see a shift in me, and that I was really starting to seem kind of depressed. And she encouraged me to make paintings about that. And that was, I think I was about 12 years old at that point when I did this first painting that was a little bit more personal. It's called The Piece That Doesn't Fit, because I felt like I was the piece of the puzzle that just did not fit in my environment. And making art like that really helped. It took all those feelings that were bottled up and gave them somewhere to go. And there it was, I couldn't even really talk about some of these emotions. I didn't have the vocabulary or the understanding, but I was able to make a painting about it. And so I knew that art was very important to me, and I wanted to have an artistic life. And at that point in time, the road that I saw was to become a Disney animator, because I love cartoons. My parents wanted me to choose a path where they felt like I would be able to make money. That's always the fear whenever your kid wants to go to art school. The parents are like, well, how are you going to live? So I thought I wanted to become a Disney animator. This is one of the drawings in my high school portfolio. I just put in there. So I ended up going to Columbus College of Art and Design. But as wonderful as it was to be around other artists and to be learning so much, I was still in the closet. I grew up, like I said, in a pretty conservative community. My family was very conservative and homophobic. I just was not ready to deal with that part of myself. I didn't even really accept that. It wasn't even like I was, consciously struggling with it, because I was in such deep denial. But self-expression is really difficult when you don't know who you are. So being in art school, I was learning a lot of techniques, but I didn't really dig very deeply into how art could, express much about myself, because I just wasn't ready yet. So in college, I painted a lot of landscapes, things that were safe, but it was a good time for me to learn the techniques of art. But I don't feel like I really created, and nothing against landscapes, by the way. Landscapes are beautiful, but I'm not a landscape artist. Which, you seeing my college portfolio, you might think otherwise, but this was kind of what was safe for me at that time. Now, I also took one animation class and I absolutely despised it. So my Disney dreams fell by the wayside a little bit. It turns out animation is a lot harder than being a Disney princess, which is what I think I actually probably wanted to do. So there's a lot of math involved in animation. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't the way that I thought or processed. So I actually switched over to an illustration major, which was a much better fit, and really learned how to use art to tell stories. And that's what I've always loved to do anyway. When I graduated, I started a mural painting business with a friend of mine. We did murals all over the place. It was a lot of fun. I also got to illustrate a syndicated comic strip for about a year, which was a really cool experience. It was written by the same person who wrote Ziggy. They'd send me the 7 scripts and I would illustrate them all, and they'd go out to newspapers. I got to do a bunch of children's books. So I was really grateful after I graduated from college just to be able to work and to do, what I loved. But it wasn't until I finally came out of the closet that I really started to find my own voice as an artist. And I was actually, my mural painting friend, Melissa, we were painting together on this mural somewhere, and we became really close working together. So she was the first person that I told, and she was so wonderful and accepting. And then we went back to my place and painted this giant mural of Cher as a celebration of that moment, because I love Cher. Very original, I know. But it's true, I can't help it. And then that was when I really started painting, like, I feel like serious artwork. I started really thinking about my life and my journey, and who I was, my identity. This is a piece called A World Apart, and it was kind of represents how as a child I felt that I had to bury so much of who I really was beneath the surface, because otherwise I was afraid I would lose everything that I loved. These are all paintings that I painted at that time. This was about 20 years ago now, that really dealt with all of the feelings of coming out and exploring. So the one on the left is called First Time Out, and that kind of dealt with the first time that I actually had an experience with another man, processing some of the internalized shame that came with that. And then just a bunch of other paintings. I mean, I could talk all day about these, but you're welcome to, and I invite you to check out my website to see more of the work and to hear all of the stories about the various pieces. I don't want to take too much time, but I will say that when I made these paintings at first, I had no intention of actually sharing them with anybody, because I still was not out to my family, and to certain people in my life. So they truly were art therapy. I would paint them and then wait for them to dry and then unstretch them from the canvases and roll them up and put them in the closet, which is kind of ironic. But that's how I started. But the paintings were coming from a very genuine place, and they helped me a lot. And finally, my friends convinced me that I should take them out of the closet and show them somewhere. So I started to do, this was a photo from my very first solo art show. I found that sharing that really personal work was a powerful thing, because other people who had been through similar experiences could relate to what my paintings were about. And I had such deep, interesting conversations with strangers that I never, painting them, I felt like they were so personal and nobody else would really even understand them or care about them. But that was not the case at all. Art is such a powerful way to connect with other people. And it also can become activism. I feel it's my most powerful form of activism, is to tell my story and to be visible, and hopefully that will help empower other people to do the same thing. These are just some more examples of my work that kind of tells my story. I've always loved Dolly Parton, so that piece on the left is little me. Instead of going to Oz, I would have picked Dollywood. So I like to play with pop culture sometimes, or political themes sometimes. Here's an example of that was a pretty controversial painting when I did it, probably 13 years ago now. Noah's Gay Wedding Cruise. So I put all same-sex couples on the boat, and then you can't really see it in this crop, but in the water is all the Republican politicians who were opposing marriage equality. So they're the drowning sinners in my painting. It's my work, I can say whatever I want. And I also found that controversy was a really good thing, because the more people that really got kind of upset and offended. It also meant that the painting was, my work was being spread further and reaching more people. So I've never minded that. You know, I don't want to just preach to the choir. I'm glad when people see my work and it makes them, you know, think, or it causes any kind of reaction. I've gotten to do a lot of awesome things in my career, and I'm so grateful for those experiences. Like I got to do some work for James Franco for a movie that's coming up pretty soon. Troye Sivan, who's a young singer that I really like, he commissioned me to do a painting to promote his new single recently. And then probably my favorite commission of all time, I got to do this past December. Dolly Parton hired me to make a painting for her living room, and she loves butterflies, so she wanted a giant painting of butterflies, and I got to drive it to her house and hang it up. It was kind of like the highlight of my life, I have to say. So if you if you have a dream, I'd say you've got to work, you've got to believe in it and keep going, because little, you know, 6-year-old me would have never imagined getting to drive to Dolly's house. It's pretty amazing. When I think about that little kid and how much I felt like I did not fit in as a child, all of those things I was so ashamed of are so integral to who I am and why I'm a happy, healthy person today. So I always try to encourage and empower young people to learn how to kind of celebrate the things that make them unique. And so Linda, my childhood art teacher, and I started a project together called You Will Rise in 2011 to help those who have experienced bullying express themselves through the arts. And it's completely uncensored. Kids can create whatever kind of work they want. They can put bad words in it. They can just vent, because you have to, all of those feelings have to have somewhere to go. We do workshops where we bring students together to create really powerful artwork, and then it, you know, host exhibits of the work so that the public can see that and learn from their story. And we do a lot of public art around these themes too. So this was a mural that we did at Cornell University about the idea of labels. So we made big portraits of students using Post-it notes, and they would write labels on the Post-it notes that represented different names that they had been called, either positive or negative labels that they associated with. And this is a similar concept, another mural that I did using puzzle pieces. So we found 3 diverse people from the community and made their portraits using 30,000 puzzle pieces. Obviously not putting the pieces where they're supposed to go, but finding our own way to use them. I love stuff like that. I love public art. I love art that, you know, helps to bring people together and have conversations about things. So these are just some more examples of my work. I love doing figurative paintings. I'm really drawn to people and their stories. I paint a lot of queer people. I always find a way to connect with whoever it is I'm painting. So learning about what their lives are like. And I feel like it's a way for me to kind of shine the spotlight on lots of different people. And I really enjoy that. So every day I still feel like I'm just getting started. I love what I do. I'm always trying something new and looking forward to the next adventure. So that's me. And here's all of my social media stuff. If you want to check out You Will Rise project, or if you want to follow me anywhere, would love to have you do that.
Awesome. Right on time.
Oh, good. My timer just went off, so I knew I knew I had to wrap it up.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm blown away. I really, really am.
Oh, thank
you. Terrific stuff. And we've gotten much more to talk about in the discussion section. Tret here, you're next. And I don't think you need to share your screen, but you do need to share your sound. So
I'm back on. I muted myself.
It's all yours now. So okay, go for it.
Awesome. That was wonderful, Paul.
Thank you.
I love the journey of your life, and
thank you.
And in some ways, like you, I had a very early start with art. I started playing piano when I was 5 years old, and found that I had a real talent for it. And was writing songs when I was 7 that my piano teacher would have me play for her high school students. So that was pretty cool. But as we moved, my piano was sold, and I never got another. I took up violin. But when I was 11 years old, I got my first guitar. My oldest brother came home with a guitar that he was intending to learn how to play, and I took it out of his hands and said, "That's mine." And I knew in that moment, I knew I wanted to be a folk singer. I wanted to travel the world writing songs, hopefully In those days, I wasn't sure. Sharing stories, sharing my life as it was just forming. And I have been able to sustain myself as a musician my entire life. I'm now 70 years old. And not many people that aren't in mainstream can say that, and to have a full-time job as an artist. And it's something that I am eternally grateful for all my life. So when I was 19 years old, I moved to Los Angeles because that's where the music business was. And I was planning on being a big star. Interestingly, though, in the 70s, as my manager shopped, well, first of all, I had the good fortune of my first professional gig was with Spencer Davis. I was Spencer Davis's guitar player. Many of you probably have no idea who Spencer Davis is, but Google him because he was a big star in the 70s, and I was his guitar player for a few years, which led me to my first record deal. But my manager had to shop several labels before I got a deal because every label only had one woman on their label. It was a novelty act. You could have as many boy bands and male artists, but they weren't interested in women. And this was something that plagued me all through the 70s. I had a record deal. The president was fired from the company, so all his artists had to go with him. I had a second record deal with United Artists that was just about to be released when United Artists decided to get out of the music business and just concentrate on movies. And then in the late 70s, I kept working. I became a sound engineer so I could sustain myself while still being in the business. And finally found a third record deal with a guy who wanted to dress me all in leather, wanted me to sing his songs, which were all these broken-hearted guy songs. I wasn't going to do it, and I walked. And he also wanted to own all my publishing, so I walked. And fortunately for me, I hooked up with a woman that I had been involved with in the early 70s, June Millington, from a very famous all-women rock and roll band, Fanny. And she introduced me to Chris Williamson, who was the pioneer of women's music. Truly, she and Meg Christian they started women's music. So in 1980, I met her as her recording engineer for a children's album she was doing. And Chris and I fell in love. I left the mainstream. I continued engineering and producing. I produced most of Chris's work and engineered most of Chris's work. And we immediately became a couple because we just realized that we were soulmates from the beginning. And I moved into this genre called women's music, which was, when I came in, this started in like 1975, but when I entered the genre, 5,000 to 7,000 women would come to concerts. We played huge venues. We played Royce Hall at UCLA. We played giant theaters. We played the Wiltern in LA. We played Carnegie Hall 3 times. In fact, the first time that we played Carnegie Hall, it was called Meg and Chris at Carnegie Hall. It was Chris Williamson and Meg Christian. And we had 2 back-to-back sold-out shows. So that translates to about 5,600 women who descended on New York City dressed in tuxes and gowns, pulling up in horse and carriages, and people on the street, their jaws were just like, what is going on? And it was an amazing, phenomenal experience. And I was fortunate enough to fall into this. I engineered and co-produced that Carnegie album for Meg and Chris. Worked with Chris Williamson for 20 years through the heydays of women's music, and then on into a time that was where the culture didn't seem to be as important. It was so important for us in the early 80s and the late 70s because women really did not have a place. And the music scene gave especially gay women, not all lesbian women, but mostly gay women, a place to be, a place to gather. It was a huge community. And because so many women, older women, have come out of very tough, broken relationships, abusive marriages, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, so many older lesbians and queer women have come out of that culture. And this was life-saving for women, to have a place to gather and to share music and to sing together. And it was the politics of the music was the fact that we were women gathering. that we had a room of our own. The music wasn't as political as it was personal, but and as we know, the personal is the political, and that's very true still in my music. I do write a lot of socially and politically conscious music, but I write a lot of stories about family, stories about love, and that's what, and most of my audience is still women, although I have migrated back into the folk community over the years as women's music felt, as women were able to come out and be mainstream artists, people like Katie Lang and Melissa Etheridge and the Indigo Girls and Tracy Chapman, they could be out lesbian artists, and we could not be, really. I mean, we were, but we were not accepted in the mainstream the way that they have been. So we were always pigeonholed, and so in a lot of ways, the women's movement kind of fell by the wayside. And the thing that has held us together over the decades has been women's festivals. And that is where women still gather. I just came from two festivals, smaller festivals that came out of a huge organization called MishFest, the Michigan Women's Music Festival, where 9,000 women would attend to spend a week together in the woods, taking off their clothes, mostly Midwest women who'd never had an opportunity to express themselves in any way. This was groundbreaking, and this went on for 40 years. And in 2015, they finally stopped MishFest, but the land still belongs to the women, and they're hosting all different events. I did a festival called Serenity and Sobriety for women who are in recovery, still mostly a lot of older women who are in recovery and have survived terrible abuse in their lives. And you know, families that were separated, women who left their husbands and lost their children until later in their lives, when they could come, when the children realized that there's nothing wrong with my mom. But and then I just came from a second festival called Big Mouth Girl, and there was about 300 women. So the gatherings are smaller, but the gatherings are still so important, because even though women seem to be able to walk more openly and clearly in the world as queer people, we still are very much not allowed in many rooms, and that has been something that has gone on for a very long time. And and one of the things that happened for me, then this was interesting in the culture, because women were so looking for role models, always looking for role models. Chris Williamson and I were a role model to a lot of women. We were they called us the poster children for codependency, because we were personal and professional partners, and everyone looked up to us as this ideal couple. But after 20 years with Chris, I had to leave. I had to find my own art again, because I was getting it was too much Chris and Tret. There was no definition, there was no separation of our arts, and it was starting to smother me as an artist. But my walking away from Chris, I couldn't just walk away professionally. I had to walk away personally as well. Created a huge schism in the women's movement. I was denied access to a lot of things. I was told that I can't leave her, because if you break up, what are we going to do? And a lot of women did break up and told me, thank you for having the courage to do something that we couldn't do. And these were huge things, but I lost my manager, I lost my label, I lost my tour, and I had to completely rebuild myself. And when I rebuilt myself, I reemerged through the folk world as a union activist. I was the president of the local 1,000 traveling musicians union, did all kinds of things in that regard. But still, when I tour, which I do incessantly, except for the last 16 months, of course, I play still to mostly women. And I am all grateful that those women still see me as someone that they can relate to, that my stories relate to them. And I'd like to do this song. And this is the title song from my 17th album. And it sort of talks of my life. It talks of my 20-year relationship with Chris Williamson, a 10-year relationship with Jane Weldon, with whom I started a line of clothing, Tomboy Girl, which is a whole nother story. And then my current marriage. And I wanted to sing this because we can now get married. And it's something I never in my life thought I would be able to do. So this is called Stone by Stone. I had a life, it seemed so beautiful. I had a home, it was quite large. There were 2 horses and a studio, a great big fireplace, and I built the barn. 7 acres in the country. In '93, my mother died. For 7 years, somewhat numbly, we walked the pasture, stride by stride. It is amazing that life continues, and stone by stone we move along. I have a new life, it too is beautiful, and I keep the old inside my songs. I have a life, I lived in Madison. I had a home, and it was small, but it was cozy. It had a lot of sun, and I raked the leaves come every fall. For 10 good years it felt like home, until our lost love left me cold. I shoveled snow and did it all alone, and I kept my chin up, both brave and bold. It is amazing that life continues, and stone by stone we move along. I have a new life, it too is beautiful, and I keep the old inside my songs. I have a life near the ocean. I've traveled far for another shot, and I have children and great commotion, and a wife. Who would have thought? In all my years and all these miles and all the shoes that I have worn, there is renewal. Once in a while, we die a little to be reborn. It is amazing how life continues, and stone by stone we move along. I have a new life, it too is beautiful, and I keep the old inside my songs. Thank you.
Oh man, I'm blown away.
Thank you so much. I don't know exactly how much time I have.
We're right at time, but take a couple minutes to wrap up if you want to.
Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that when I left the West Coast, when I left Chris, I moved to Madison, Wisconsin, where I lived for 12 years. And I had a song called Tomboy Girl, which my partner and I turned into a clothing line. I had a retail store. We started a women's festival called Tomboy Girl that ran for 2 years. But what this did, and so many women have bought my clothing, I'm closing it now because I've been doing it for 20 years and I'm done. But it gave women an opportunity to feel empowered by the word tomboy, because when I grew up, it was an onus. You were not allowed, that was a bad word. But for women now, even though they don't necessarily use tomboy that much, they still do, and they wear the clothing. There's now a Tomboy X company, shirt company. There's a tomboy company. So I think I've done my job in having Tomboy Great Girl. And I always wanted to include the girl And because I included the girl, many gay men bought my clothing. It was awesome. So I've successfully maneuvered that part of our culture as well. And again, I'm so grateful for the support I've always gotten, and I'm very grateful to be part of this today. So thank you.
Oh, Tret, I'm blown away. Both of you guys, seriously. I'm gonna have to ask you more about Chris Williamson, because Chris Williamson and Joan Baez, that's my era, so awesome. We'll talk more about that in the discussion.
Well, and actually, I had texted Tiffany that at the point of time when I found Chris and Tret's music, I was incredibly suicidal. And you literally kept me on the planet.
Thank you.
Wow.
I've heard that a lot. That's amazing to me. Thank you.
Well, Andrew, no pressure. Andrew does some great work. So it's your turn. You can share. You should be able to share your screen, but I gave you a brief introduction before, but Andrew, an alumnus, a photographer. And there you
go. Well, thanks for putting me at the end of these two that are already setting the tone way high. So appreciate that arrangement. First off,
you give us hope for the future, honey.
Don't take too good of notes today, guys, okay? But first and foremost, I want to do a shout out to Dr. Tiffany Grimes. Love you. I miss you. She was in my class of people. So if y'all have any chance to cherish a time, just 5 minutes with her, you'll be blessed, okay? So sorry to shout you out so directly, but there you go. Hi, everyone. It's good to be back. I really appreciate being asked to be a part of this panel with incredible visual artist, as well as a musician and singer-songwriter. My presentation is probably going to be the love child version of both these presentations, because I'll give y'all a little bit of a look into what I have been up to. Let me just get my slides ready and my time started. So again, thank you all for having me. A little bit about me. I am a licensed mental health counselor here in the state of Florida, and I am also a photographer. One of the peculiar things I probably did in my undergrad years was major in psychology and minor in photography. So I was kind of an artist in a psychological science nerd group, and then the nerd in a photography group. So with those identities I was trying to formulate, it was very much separated by the colleges within the arts and sciences at the time. But I ended my undergraduate years with a 35mm series on a theater production and rehearsals and casting process that was exhibited at Jacksonville University. And moving into my grad school years, I was studying mental health counseling. And while also I was working on some other advocacy groups. Most recently, my career has led me to providing mental health services on telehealth platforms such as BetterHelp and Pride Counseling. Pride Counseling being that it is affiliated for LGBTQ identifying adults. And currently I have just started work with a psychedelic integrative clinic in Miami, my ketamine home, which will soon transfer to New Life. But a little bit about me. Before I even became a part of the program, I was running a mental health advocacy group within the local music scene here in Jacksonville, Florida, and St. Augustine, Florida. So I like to say North Florida chapters, and those are the two cities and counties that I'm mainly discussing. And we, a couple friends and I, we noticed that there was some particular issues within the community that was going on that was mental health related. Being that I was the person studying psychology and mental health counseling at the time, I felt that it was good to kind of start a discussion of some sort that led into building a advocacy group so that we can bring conversations to the stages that are already built and help build better mindsets for better tomorrows. And we first started on the festival circuits, just linking on with different touring companies and really getting a brand and message out there at the same time. And as we began our work, a lot of people were attracted to our message, to what we were about here in the music scene. And we realized that we were fulfilling a need that a lot of other agents or advocacy groups have begun in other parts of the country and world. So we were just following a zeitgeist, building mental health conversation in a music setting. And soon we started getting a lot of messages and a lot of stories about people with their mental health struggles, and a lot of questions and questions about resources and like what's available for them. So being a mental health counselor, that was something that I was definitely learning. And I had already gained networking with a couple of resource agencies in town. So we definitely utilized that. Soon after, we were figuring out what we were going to do with these stories. So I launched a campaign called I'm Not My Label. And I'll let you know, this part came before we invested in a graphic designer, okay? And one of the things that we aimed for this particular project, I'm Not My Label, is to go over the negative stigma that mental health diagnoses are being presented as in the mainstream outside of a psychological world and a medical health world. So we wanted to launch this campaign to get a better sense of these stories and have it to kind of wrap up with a theme of promoting hope for tomorrow and disintegrating these diagnosticable labels as an identity of sort. And it was also offered by me that I will take the portraits for any submitter who is local to the North Florida area. And we were able to hear a lot of testimonies about people with anxiety disorders, adjustment disorders due to immigration struggles, gender dysphoria, bipolar disorder, other personality disorder treatments, along with misdiagnoses with individuals. And we even received stories of people's different therapeutic journeys of finding the right therapist and giving advice on what specialist is the right one to talk with. And we finally capped it out after receiving 100 stories to present these stories in a live form. All we needed to do was find a stage and a microphone, and luckily being set in a music scene, that was already there. So we really lucked out on that end, I'd say. And after an incredible year of our fans really being the ones that promoted this discussion advocacy program, that really wanted us at the shows, that were building shows solely for us to be a part of, we wanted to give them a little treat. So of course we made an album. We asked our affiliated musicians and songwriters if they would submit and donate a song that was either in their catalog already or something that they wanted to write and do a rough recording at a studio that we had been affiliated with for that year to come and track a record. And I started to notice a little bit of an identity shift with me as I was starting to become prepared to assume this role as a mental health practitioner and a clinician within community mental health. I also was really deprived in my graduate program because there was nothing about LGBT mental health. Like, we went over multicultural counseling and human sexuality. I think gay was brought up, or even homosexual was brought up just a handful of times. Granted, my instructors were heterosexual and of a different era of psychology and psychotherapy. And so I was not getting a need quenched there all around the time that I was really coming out as a songwriter. But being that my songs were really oriented through the lens of my own heart, my lust, love, heartbreak, it was gay themed, but I was photographing in a heterodominant arena. But even though it was heterodominant, I felt more accepted once I came out as queer, and I was embraced and I was loved, and I was cherished, and I was protected, which was not the same as what I received in the main gay pockets of North Florida, where it was more objectifying and, you know, substance-induced culture. Not really my scene per se, but yeah, no judgment. But we wanted to make sure that our fans had something tangible to take with them after just giving us so much of themselves and donations and just their bodies and physical presence in these shows. And I took this as an opportunity to finally utilize a identity that I've been wanting to promote. So I decided to submit a song to this album, which there is a link right here in the description of the album in full, as well as my track. And this was the first time I ever provided a song of mine in a queer lens. And this is where there started to be a real shift for me. And in the song, I revealed more about my sense of truth in one of the bridges, but in every line of that song, I input myself as I sang through my own struggles with depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation and even substance use to escape from that particular cognitive turmoil that I was succumbing to in a Southern Baptist Bible Belt culture that I grew up in. And so the line that I wrote in there was, "Here's to the ones who fall in love, who are too afraid to try, so they give it up. It doesn't matter what they think, so live your life in pink, because you make life so beautiful, and everything is made for you. When it all comes down, you're the strength that survived, and I'm glad that you stayed alive." And if anything, thank you, Tret, for writing the songs that kept Dr. Cat alive. I've been blessed with her presence in my life and her mentorship and love and support throughout the years. So it goes to show you that music can be your therapy, but what we wanted to do in this group was lead our chosen rhetoric of music is my therapy to music led me to therapy. And once I entered my final year of grad school and doing practicum and internship, I closed my affiliation with Mind Over Music Movement. They produced a second compilation album the following year, and I have wished them well in their progress forward. I believe it's disbanded now, but it created a ripple effect in our community, and that was worth more than any success story for me. The fact that we kept the conversation going and people were willing to take that conversation forward. And capping out a good year and a half of doing shows, I had a large collection of portraits of musicians that I worked with in between bar shows and Mind Over Music events and rehearsals, musician interviews and songwriting sessions. And I wanted to encapsulate that. And so I was granted a full gallery space at a local theater here in Jacksonville, the Five and Dime Theater Company. And this was exhibited 3 days before Dr. Forssell gave me an interview for the program. And it was at the perfect time to where I wanted to bridge all my identities as a psychology lover, as a photographer, and as a queer person. And so as I was developing this project, I did take notice that everyone I photographed was heterosexual. Nothing against them, love them all. And in fact, these are the individuals in the music scene that embraced me more than I've ever thought I could possibly deserve. And it was a beautiful community to be a part of and to continue to cherish relationships within this community. And then I had to change things up once I got a part of this program, and I'm so glad I did because I was able to work on pretty much where I left off, but just in a different arena. My capstone project was an extension of the work I had done before, but much more outside of my comfort zone because I was always lifted up in music and theater spaces, but I felt my queerness in those spaces was the core of my uniqueness. I was the only gay in the village, as I usually joked. And it's only recently that I've started to actually see other queer artists really started to become integrated into the music scene to where there's starting to not be so much of a divide that I'm visually seeing as I once did. But it was definitely something of a case that I was fearless in a boys club setting, which I had aspired to assimilate in most of my life. I was told to do so just to fit in, but not to disintegrate any part of my true self. So my queerness was definitely embraced in these settings, but what I thought was 100%, it was came out to be 60% once I got into the program and start to understand what microaggressions were and like how much I was putting up with certain things just to spare people's feelings. I will say this particular program gave me such a different tone of voice and confidence, I would have to say. So that's something that it wasn't covered in the tuition, but damn, I sure as hell embraced it when I was there. And as a mental health counselor, I felt my nurturing ability was my one ticket to help guide me into this new setting within a drag scene. Once I kind of got into the mix of things, I realized what I was so used to in the performance photography position, photographing a performer performing, I realized where I needed to be was in the green rooms, was in the backstage units where I'd been growing as an artist much more rapidly in the music scene. So I took my lens in a very voyeuristic way, try to be a fly on the wall and find the right angles, find the right lights, and really utilize my compositions that I've developed in dimly lit areas of music venues and bars, and try to enhance a particular image that embraced a new upcoming form of drag that was differentiating itself from a former style of drag that was really notable in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s here in Jacksonville. It started to become more of a punk DIY element, that to where these drag houses were actually creating their own events in various venues that were not traditionally gay bars. And as much as I was embraced by the musicians and the boys club, this club was so kind and welcoming to me that I started to develop the project a little different than what I set out to do. I started to understand the sense of belonging that Abraham Maslow once discussed in a hierarchy of needs really came into effect when it comes to a queer community, and how community integration and connection really influences someone's sense of self-esteem, sense of belonging, connection into this world, into this community. And really exploring this particular queer quest towards self-actualization, understanding that someone's self-esteem needs are met with acceptance from others, and as well as the acceptance that we build for ourselves in our identity or the intertwining identities that we develop throughout our life. The identities that we have in between those that we're affiliated with, and the identity that we decide to take ownership of in pursuit of our passions, in pursuit of our careers, in pursuit of our life in balance, a sense of peace. Life is a drag. It is stressful, it is daunting, but if we can live it as authentically as possible, even with the aid of being supported and accepted, or finding the acceptance and commitment to oneself. Either way, I believe photography allows people to see a different context of humanity that they can aspire to. And drag queens have continuously been a part of that narrative of pushing those bounds of what is gender, what is sexuality, what is performance even. And I definitely wanted to share that particular message in this project as best as I could. And I believe that is all I have to say on that. So thank you.
Excellent. Wow. Wow. I got to say, I'm blown away by all three of you, and this has gone farther than I thought it would go, and I'm really pleased. We've got time here for some discussion, but I wanted to point to, I mean, the commonalities were very obvious, but the one that stuck the most with me is how formative it is in identity for the three of you, and I think maybe across the board. What would you all say about the value of creativity to people who are maybe less professional or semi-professional in their work? And, you know, say as you know, fans of music or you know, fans of art, or people who appreciate art as opposed to creators of it, how would you see your work or any work sort of adding to people's sense of identity and sense of, bolstering self-esteem and community and that sort of thing. Just chime in when as you wish.
Well, I can say, I know that, as I mentioned, a lot of my music is very personal, and I'm a storyteller as well as a musician. And my stories seem to resonate with people. I have a lot of family stories, family songs, and my family songs resonate with my audience in ways that are larger than I can even understand sometimes. But it gives people something if you do your art right, there's something in it that your listener or your looker can take in cellularly, and it completely, that is why it can be healing, because it is so cellular. And music, particularly to me, is very cellular. And I think it is our job as artists to create work that people can resonate with and open up their own hearts and minds to.
I agree with that. And I think that the act of appreciating art is a creative process in itself, because you have to open yourself up to, what the artist was saying and think about how it applies to your life. And I often feel like when I'm making artwork that deals with some of these themes, I am expressing myself and telling my story, but I also feel like I'm doing that for other people who maybe don't have the tools to be able to make a painting or sing a song or do that type of thing. So that those ideas still get put out into the world. And just like you said, people relate to that. I think they relate to authenticity. And I've had so many interesting conversations with people that have been sparked by various paintings. And I'll share one quick story with you about that ties into this topic. I had done a series called War Paint, where I painted figures coating themselves with, different pigments that symbolize something about their story. And one of the models is a friend of mine who is trans, and he wanted to be putting the war paint on his chest because the surgery was a really, pivotal, important moment in his journey. And so that painting was in a show in an art museum. And the day before the opening, one of the women from the board came up to me and said that her grandson saw that painting on a postcard, and he's a high school student and kind of in a small town where he really didn't know many people in the LGBT world yet, but he identified as trans, and he immediately understood that that's what that painting was about, even though there was nothing written about it, it wasn't spelled out, but he got it. And he asked if he could come to the opening the next night to meet me. And I said, of course, that would be awesome. And it just so happened that my friend who modeled for the painting had driven into town and was there that night too. And I'll just never forget being at that opening and looking over and seeing this, this young person who was just at the beginning of this journey, talking with my friend who's very accomplished, artist himself and a trans activist. And they were sitting on a little bench in front of that painting talking for hours that evening. And I thought this whole thing happened because of a painting. And that, in any kind of art, it creates opportunities, I think, that just did not exist without it.
Yeah, Andrew, do you have a thought on that as well?
To kind of circle back, there was a question I think I heard in regards to advice. The advice I usually give is just follow curiosity. If you have an interest, don't commit immediately, just try. And then if you still love it and you still think about it, go for it, whatever art form it is. No one can tell you you can't weave and can't make a rug unless you literally haven't done anything for it. And that's not to apply any type of pressure or anything. That's more of just self-permission to explore your creative genius, to explore your creative worth. Some individuals don't feel like they have a creative bone because they've never explored anything past maybe coloring in a coloring book. But I believe everyone still has some sense of creativity that they express, and it might not be in a traditional or even a more modern sense of artwork. It may very well be in interior design. It may very well be in even just office setup. I see a couple of y'all are just in your office, just even setting up that and blending it to match your authentic energy and kind of doing the feng shui elements there. You can do the smallest effort to live a creative life as long as you wish to. And then in a couple of the points that Paul and Tret made, the interpretation of our art, as well as like anyone's art, is solely subjective to the person's own identity, world's perception. So I think every art piece has a chance for a viewer or even a listener to find themselves in it. And in my mentorship of photography, my professor, Ginger Sheridan, she definitely influenced that narrative to me. Can someone see themselves in this artwork, even if it's a portrait of someone? And that's an interesting tie to consider whenever I am photographing someone. Can someone look at this musician and feel like they're the rock star? Just as much as I felt like that whenever I saw a picture of so-and-so. I know Steve and I, we can go into a deep discussion on that one.
Yeah, we could. Hey, Paul, your story about the boy in the painting was just reminding. So what he saw in that painting wasn't, you didn't tell the child this is a transgender man, and this is it. That was all sort of reading between the lines. He got it, right? He saw that picture and got it. And Tret and myself, perhaps, being, and maybe Carroll, I'll include you two, slightly older in the group, but we remember growing up with seeing images and art resonating with us when it was really between the lines subtext stuff. Like gay characters have been in films forever, and everyone knew they were gay, but they didn't say that. There was the sissy character or on television, but it wasn't out there. And to me, I mean, a lot of you don't know this, but my prior career was in music. I worked in the music business till I was 34. And, the things that resonated with me as a child in the early mid 70s was Elton John, Mick Jagger, David Bowie, and Steven Tyler. These were all to me very, masculine, feminine men. They got to be men, but they also were, they had their flamboyantness to them. They had an expressiveness to them, a gender bendingness to them that, I couldn't put words to it, but I recognized it, right away. I knew exactly what it was. And that's what propelled me in my relatively brief, career in the arts. So yeah, I don't know, that for whatever that's worth. Any other thoughts? And so like identity, very, very important. And the mental health piece too. I know that I've heard a couple of stories, for Paul, that you said there was a point in time where you had a turning point where your outlet really saved your life. Kat, same thing. I mean, you mentioned Tret's music and we talked about bolstering self-esteem and making yourselves feel better. Any one of you want to talk a little bit more about like how important that is to mental health, just having that outlet as either a creator of art or a consumer or appreciator of art?
Sure. I mean, when I was growing up in middle school was really when, it started for me, the bullying and, so many kind of just identity crisis, I guess. But I was suicidal, and I truly believe that that art is what helped me to get through that time. And I can remember thinking, I so do not want to go to school tomorrow that I should just end it. But then I wouldn't be able to finish this painting that I'm doing. I need to be able to go to art class next Monday so I can finish that next painting. And I as ashamed as I was of certain aspects of myself, I also still was able to take a lot of pride in, this concept of myself as an artist. And I knew that I had things to say and that I wanted to share. And so I think that it's just so vital for everybody to have some way of expressing themselves. And I absolutely agree with what Andrew was saying earlier. It doesn't matter if you're a professional, what does that even mean? As an artist, there's no like, you don't just pass through a magic tunnel and then you are a professional. I mean, you don't have to go to college, you don't have to do anything. You could be a professional artist and completely train yourself. But what's more important is just being genuine and being authentic, because that's what people relate to. That's what, and in my own career, I've had so many people tell me, your work could sell so much better if you would separate yourself from some of the LGBT themes. And I've even had gallery owners and people suggest that I use like a different name for one body of work over the other, because they'll say, well, people would buy your mainstream art, but they Google you and they see all of this gay stuff and then they're not going to buy it. And my answer to that is, if someone's going to, you know, lose interest in my work because of this part of my identity, I don't want them to own it anyway. I'm not going back in the closet for anyone. And so it's been empowering for me also to, you know, feel confident in who I am and not worry so much about how it's received by other people, because I make my art for myself first.
Right. Yeah. I think you're right, Paul. I think authenticity is such a huge part of who we are and why we affect people. And I mean, people tell me that all the time. You're so real. I don't, like, when I'm in a show, when I do a show, you know, because I do have a table full of merchandise, CDs and tomboy girl wear and whatever. People always say, here's your green room. And I say, I don't want a green room. I stand at my table when people walk in so they can see me, so I can see them. So I know who I'm singing to. I mean, sitting in a back room and you don't know who your audience is to me, it's just ridiculous. And I'm there at intermission, and I'm there at the end to say goodbye to people. And it means so, I know it means so much to them. And they tell me so. And, you know, just to have a chance to chat with me instead of just being some, you know, superstar or whatever. And that's part of how I've always walked. And I think that's why people still migrate to me as an artist, because I walk my walk and I talk my talk. And I think that's really important.
Tret, that's like so true to my experience of photographing musicians, how I see them interact with their fans, whether it's a city that they're not from or it's the city that bred them. I can see the success rate go down the less that they interact. The minute that they just strike the stage, leave on about their day and go to their next party. It was really where I started to direct, like, oh, okay, I can't photograph this musician because they're not going to go anywhere. They have no respect for the people that are actually funding for the gas that they're going to use to drive down to the city.
Exactly.
It was definitely not a cyclical, systematic understanding of the relationship between musician and audience, and the crew around them as well, putting on the show. So it was definitely that systematic influence that I really started to understand, like, how I can really bridge myself into these particular bands, these communities. And to touch on the authenticity part, I think me being in that music setting as the only gay person, I was able to form my identity, but it was gotten to the point where it's just like, oh, the gay guy was never my identity. It's Andrew the photographer. Right. Along with, yeah, I kind of want to be known to be the gay guy, just like in this circle. No. That's definitely a microaggression, man. We don't want to have to deal with that. But by gosh, all the jokes did come about in the boys' club. And it wasn't until I started to photograph queer individuals, it was just like, oh, it's different. The energy's different. My shoulders drop more. I get a little bit more into the kiki vibe of things. And it's nice to be in a space where I'm not asked to be authentic, I just am. And it's not even built with intention or purpose like I am in these sectors. It's just is. Mm-hmm. And I like that placement right now in my careers.
You know what's really funny is, like, when you first start off, you're like, oh my God, you know, I have imposter syndrome. I can't possibly compete. And that bullshit of a hierarchy, that there's a competition, that you can't be as equally good as somebody else in another field, that you can't see that your validity of being on the planet is just as important, and your activism through your work is just as important as other means to do so. You know, I think that's why I really want to honor Steve in having this idea of, you know, it's COVID. We all get really sick and tired of Zoom meetings, and we have to do something to fill spirit up as well as our heads. And, you know, one more session of, oh my God, these are all the negative things about being queer, I just couldn't deal with today either. So I'm so grateful that all of you are fostering hope and activism, and, you know, moving on with doing that for our community members, and you never know who you touch. Oops, I need to log off because I have to go get the van to get ready to pack. And Tret, I will see you on Friday.
Absolutely.
And Shari, I hope you actually come online and talk a little bit, because I'm grateful that she could join us too for a bit today. Love you all. Talk to you later.
We're still staying. Cat's going, but we're staying. Yeah, it's great to have a session where we can not have to, write down data and names of articles to follow up on and things to do. It's great where we can just be creative. And I don't know, Andrew, when you were talking about, like, I mean, the some of the pictures you had of your scene, and you said there's sort of an underground punk kind of thing to it too, and I sort of felt the same thing. In my time in the music business was in the DC hardcore scene, and subsequently sort of managing. So, Government Issue and Black Flag and Henry Rollins and all those people were kind of my crew, and there was sort of like this tangential allowance for being the queer kid, but that wasn't my identity. But I was very well embraced, and I got more into sort of the metal art, metal stuff too, like really hardcore metal, and I felt completely accepted there too. I think there's a certain creative people sort of have an understanding of you got to be who you are and you got to express who you are, and I always felt accepted, out or not.
Yeah.
So, even early in the time.
I've always equated the punk movement and the metal movements to be so parallel to a queer art movement in general. And to even just see how metal culture developed and how it's intertwined with the sadomasochism, BDSM culture through the great metal god Rob Halford. It is absolutely. Now, if you haven't read the bio, please do, because we go back and forth on bio and memoirs on these. Right. It was blatantly queer, but people didn't really know it for sure, just on the stamp label, until he came out in a Rolling Stone interview.
For those of you not familiar, Rob Halford is the lead singer of a band called Judas Priest. One of the best known metal bands of all time. And, those of us who were queer were like, why don't other people see this? I mean, the whole persona was like the leather and the chains and the motorcycle gang. And, I worked in the business, and there were rumors flown around about Rob Halford. I worked in the metal business. And before he came out, when he was still in Judas Priest in 1995 5 or 6 or something like that, I was at a conference in Los Angeles, the Concrete Foundation's metal conference. Basically all the metal people get together. Rob Halford was the keynote speaker, and it just so happened that this coincided with the lawsuit against the band. A couple of kids unfortunately were very depressed, and they formed a suicide pact, and one of them shot and killed himself, the other shot and injured himself, and the family sued, saying that they were inspired by backwards mask sounds and all that. But literally a day or two before the conference started, the judge threw out this case, and Rob Halford showed up, and I got to meet him before his talk, and his keynote speech was really, I mean, it was very, very sensitive to these poor kids. He really did express, like, how this was important to them, but they had mental health issues that were needed to be cared for, and it was also about artistic freedom, and how that project, Paul, where you show these kids could paint whatever they wanted to, bad words and all that. I'm of the mind that's you need to be able to do that. You need to be able to, you need to have that sort of release valve. And that's kind of what Rob Halford said in his talk. And anyway, I'm glad you know him, Andrew. That's pretty cool. We wanted to open this session up for a broader conversation. We've got like about 10 or 15 minutes left. But let's like go over to Q&A, and whoever's interested in asking a question, we can have a more conversational thing. But just go ahead and let her rip.
I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your gifts and your talents and your creativity. This is just so incredible, and such a privilege to be in a room with such creative, amazing people. So I just wanted to say thank you. And as a psychologist, I'm always trying to figure out how to connect the creativity with mental health. And Andrew, just the work you're doing is incredible. And Tret and Paul, you're saving lives too. So I just wanted to say thank you. And if you have any recommendations as a mental health provider, how can I continue to weave in the creativity and just the magic that you're all contributing to the world?
I know that when we do our You Will Rise, our anti-bullying workshops, it's amazing how it seems like just having access to art materials opens up so many conversations that we don't have to force at all. I mean, we never sit everybody down and say, okay, now we are going to talk about bullying. They know that that's why they are there. They've self-selected to be a part of it for that reason. But when they come, we're talking about art, and let's make art together that tells your story. And then once they start making the art, the conversations just happen so naturally. It's like that creative process just totally opens the door for them. So any ways of integrating, art making into the practice, I would think would be really helpful as a tool for opening people up.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to me coming into private practice with telehealth, I was working in greenlighting a therapeutic program at a local magnet arts high school. So I was providing mental health services to creative arts students. And I will say I had the longest wait list in the county, for sure. But it was incredible to work with so many different individuals from different art forms, working with dancers, as well as photographers, as well as sculpturists, as well as painters and ceramic individuals and glass blowing majors. It was incredible to see just the magic that they brought into their work. But what came into effect was the work that they were presenting, it was primarily forced upon them as an assignment. Granted, it was open invitation to put your creative influence in there, but to what regard? Some individuals, they were dealing with sexual trauma. They couldn't put nudity in their portraiture because, oh, well, it's a child. And so we had to go through over those dynamics. It's like, okay, well, this is her body, her story. Okay, you can't do that here, but you know what? In this setting, you can. There is no sense of censorship. Cuss all you want. All the 4-letter words that your mama would like put Tabasco sauce on your tongue for, say it here. I wanted to make sure that while they were in this room, that they felt safe and secure to be who they want. In some chances, that 50-minute session was the only time that they got to hear their pronouns as they demanded. Mm. And that was the first time that they actually had their work portfolio looked at and provided constructive criticism without the comparison factor in their classroom during that, to where often they would hear criticism instead of the constructive part. And so going over those particular tones and conversations was really helpful for them to process past this art school dynamic that was pressured on them at a very young age at a collegiate level, but like they were emotionally adolescent.
I do a lot of, I teach songwriting individually and in workshop settings, and mostly I teach non-songwriters how to write songs. And it just opens up something that is just so powerful. And I mean, they end up being much more cathartic than I would go in and, instinctively thinking would happen. Just people sobbing at the end of workshops. We would write a song together because that opens up the process, and it also allows you to learn how to write with other people, to co-author something, and that's a big thing. But it's that process is like I mostly do teach to women, although I do teach to men as well, but mostly these women gather, and it is a safe space for them, and they can create their own songs. And to walk away from a workshop and have a song that you've created is just mind-boggling for some of these people. And it really is one of the most healing things. It gives me more satisfaction than almost anything I do, especially in the group settings more than the individual, because it's powerful. And music, all art is very powerful. There's something about writing your own song and singing your own song that's incredible. As an amateur, or whatever you want to call it, is really powerful.
Well, Tret, I have my first songwriters retreat in Nashville coming up in November. So you just gave me a lot of things to look forward to.
Say hi to Dolly for me.
I will. We're having tea on the
Okay,
last
good.
day. Yeah. Carl called me over. The way back.
You're too funny. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions?
So what is it really like, I guess, as an artist to actually hear from someone that your medium or your specific art saved their life? Because obviously, like when you make your own painting, like for instance, for Paul, like, you know, that's something that is your experience that you put out there, and for someone to identify that entire feeling and having it known to you that like that's something that really saved their life, like what is that, I guess, like, because as I think you had said about you're supposed to be able to, actually I think maybe it was Andrew, like you're looking at yourself like a portrait of someone else, but you're identifying your own self in that.
To me, it's a reminder of how connected we really are. And growing up feeling so isolated and just thinking that there was nobody else in the world like me, and now, you know, making paintings and hearing from people all over the world that they relate to them, it's very powerful. There's a young man in India, a high school student, and I always write to people because I always write back to people and try to be as accessible as possible, because you never know how you might be able to help someone. And this young man related to the LGBT themes in my work and wrote to me on Instagram to say how, you know, difficult it is to, you know, for him to deal with his identity in his community, and he just had to be, it was very dangerous. But he showed me his artwork, and it was incredible. He was completely self-taught. He had not had any of the advantages that I'd had growing up with, you know, private art lessons and all of this. He just had this natural talent that was mind-blowing. And I wrote back to him and I said, you should apply to come to art school in the US and, you know, find a place where you can be free to be yourself and explore that too, because that's an important part of your creative journey. And I sent him resources for scholarships, and he wrote back to me 6 or 7 months later and said, well, I took your advice and I got a full scholarship and I'm coming to the Art Institute of Chicago. And he's now in his senior year there this coming year. So this was a few years ago, but we've stayed in touch. I actually did a painting of him for a show a year ago, and it's a connection that I could never have predicted or imagined would happen, but it just, to me, really speaks to the power of art and how connected we all are, even when we don't realize it.
Absolutely. It's fantastic.
For me, I have a weird job. I have to hold space for a lot of people on their worst days of their life, or their worst thought clusters of their life of that day, catastrophes going through their head. And I don't think I've been in a situation where my art has been identified as something that saved them, or if anything, it's influenced them. But I would say going through the therapeutic process has shown me that this is a quote that rang true when I was reading a memoir of Michael Nesmith. I've already talked to Stephen about it, where out of all the arts, the art of healing was the most important. And whether it is through photographic means, whether it's a commissioned portrait where I am providing a chance for someone in a very vulnerable space with all eyes on them to feel comfortable, to reduce self-consciousness, to build esteem just through simple lighting procedures and simple angles, to accentuate exactly the parts of themselves that they want viewed, that are themselves. And that just comes from a light discussion exactly how they want their portrait to be done. And if that provides them a sense of hope or even positive motivation, whether in whatever capacity that they're using that portrait for, whether it's touring, promotions, or it's for a LinkedIn profile, let's be honest. And it's something for them that they can look at and it's just like, I love that. And more importantly, I love the day that was created. That's what rings true so much in my heart. And now that I'm a year out of working with high school students, I'm now seeing them emerge in the art scene that I've been a part of for a long time. And to see them push forward with their art practice and building their own style outside of an academic setting, it's so beautiful to see themselves give themselves that permission to continue, to explore the time that they do have allotted in their days to enhance, to grow.
Mm-hmm. You know what I've noticed it's been interesting for me over the pandemic is how powerful, like I do a concert every 3 weeks on YouTube, live from home with Tret, in which I share my music, I share photographs of my family, I share photographs of my childhood, I share my stories. And I can't tell you how many people have told me that I got them through COVID, that my shows every 3 weeks, they would look forward to these people. I have people from all over the world that would come to my shows, and I have been told so many times, you saved us through COVID, and thank you. And that's pretty powerful right there. That's something that, I'm going to continue to do live stream shows even when I'm back out on the road, but as I am now. But it's just, the ways we are able to touch people in ways that we wouldn't even imagine, And I look at some of the shows online and people are just sitting next to their computer and they're just like doing this. It's like, well, that's not inspiring. I try to do a show and be as inspiring, stand and dance and be as inspiring as I can, because I know people have needed it more than ever in this time, and will continue to.
That's awesome. Well, I can't think of a better way to wrap it up. So we're right at time. This has been far more than I expected, and I really appreciate the three of you being on here and everyone in this conversation. So yeah, let's do this again, and try to, if you are going to be on the road and come through DC, let's try to set something up at GW. I know we can figure something out. That'll be fun to have the show. So.
Definitely. I'm up for it, so yeah.
We will, so we're going to take a break and we will resume with the entertainment portion of our program in an hour after lunch with Mark Schoen's. I'm actually going to send a little spreadsheet to you with the different PSAs he's going to be marching through, but he'll show you these different sexuality public service announcement ads that have been run and that are part of his collection with Sex Mart Films. So that'll also be entertaining. And don't forget the forum tonight. Show up for that of the piece on aging. So thanks again, Paul, Andrew, and Tret, and we'll see everyone in about an hour.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.